Hello, Archie Dunlop here with Talking Astrology with Archie. And in this video, I'm going to be looking at the weekend of February the 8th and 9th, 2025. And the main feature of this weekend, arguably, is a trine aspect between Mars and Saturn. So this pairing of Mars and Saturn is traditionally seen as being quite unfortunate. That's why I've got a skull on the thumbnail, and Mars-Saturn can be connected with death. And I thought it would be a good idea to look at, what the Mars-Saturn trine actually means. You think trine, good aspect maybe, but good aspect between two difficult planets. How does that work out? So that's the main theme for today's video. But first of all, I want to look at the astrology and the I Ching for the weekend of February the 8th and 9th, 2025. And usual reminder, if you enjoy this video, I would be very grateful if you were to like it. If you're not subscribed, I would be super grateful if you were to subscribe. It does make a difference to the channel. So let's see what's happening this weekend. So here is the chart for the weekend. I have set this chart up for midnight on Sunday the 9th, and it's set for New York for no particular reason. It's just a matter of convenience. And looking at this chart, in the middle of the weekend, we have the moon in Cancer. And this is a reminder that we see a transition. So at 11:04 on Saturday morning, London time, the moon moves into Cancer. And so that means if you're in Europe at the beginning of Saturday, moon is in Gemini, then it moves into Cancer. If you're in Australia or New Zealand, then fairly late on Saturday, the moon will move into Cancer. So for most of us, for most of the weekend, the moon will be in Cancer, and that does create a bit of a change. There has been this air emphasis. We've still got the Sun and Mercury in Aquarius, and we've got Jupiter in Gemini, Pluto in Aquarius as well, but the moon is now out of Gemini, so not quite so much air around, and moon in Cancer represents a point of contrast. Moon in Cancer is, a very good place for the moon. The moon is in its own sign in Cancer, and that means that there is a greater emotional awareness, even a greater emotional maturity, though at the same time some of us might be a little bit defensive, looking after our own interests and understanding the importance of security. That is a feature of the moon in Cancer, or at least it can be. And as far as lunar aspects are concerned, Saturday, just before the moon moves into Cancer, it makes a square to Neptune, so that would be moon in Gemini square Neptune in Pisces. I'm not saying that's a hugely significant aspect, but it does maybe create a little bit of uncertainty, though it's quite a sensitive pairing, Moon and Neptune. But we just might get a little bit confused by what's going on around us, and we might reach the wrong conclusions based on our erroneous interpretation of the emotional environment. Then Moon moves into Cancer. The moment the Moon moves into Cancer, it makes a square with Venus. Venus is in early Aries, so that represents a bit of a contrast, doesn't it? Venus in Aries, Venus in its detriment, and not always knowing how to behave in a social sense, Venus in Aries, but Moon in Cancer is more restrained, sort of more sensible. So there might be a little bit of irritation there and nervousness about it. How does one behave? Perhaps responding badly to other people's poor behavior, or we've got two receptive signs square each other, and that could be an inappropriate expression of emotion. The moon is in Cancer, so that is good in the sense that it allows a greater emotional sensitivity, but perhaps one can take that too far with the moon making the square to Venus. And then Sunday, moon moves on. Moves on towards a conjunction of Mars. You can see at midnight the moon is getting close to that conjunction of Mars, and moon conjunct Mars can actually be quite an angry aspect. And Guido Bonatus in his aphorisms, so Guido Bonatus was a sort of medieval monk, and it is said that Guido Bonatus was sort of employed as an astrologer actually for suggesting the times in which cities should be attacked. This was in Italy when there were lots of city-states at war with each other, and so Guido Bonatus, his advice was sometimes used. But he was a monk. That doesn't sound a very monkly thing to do, but I'm not quite sure what he was up to astrologically. But he did say about Moon-Mars contacts, he said something like, the woman is always right, I'll warrant. So what he's saying there, obviously talking to a male audience, talking about Moon Mars, he was saying, don't argue with women while the moon is making an aspect with Mars, which kind of makes sense because the moon is traditionally a feminine planet and it's conjunct Mars, so that can represent an argumentative woman from a perspective of Bonatus, from a perspective of Bonatus. And aside from the lunar aspects, the weekend starts with a quincunx between Mercury and Mars. So Mercury-Mars quincunx is a bit verbal. That would be Mercury in Aquarius, quincunx Mars in Cancer. Very different forces, Mercury in Aquarius, Mars in Cancer. We want things to be rational and logical, Mercury in Aquarius, but we run up against Mars in Cancer. We find our emotions intruding, and how do we bring a thing together? There's a way. And some people are going to be more affected by this aspect than others. Then Sunday, well, two important aspects happening on Sunday. We've got the Sun making a conjunction to Mercury, absolute exact conjunction. There's always a bit of a controversy with Sun conjunct Mercury if it's exact, if it's very close, because there is a view that it's a cazimi conjunction. It's so close that it becomes a benefic influence rather than anything negative. Because traditionally in astrology, when the Sun is close to Mercury, or indeed the Sun is close to any other planet, we have the condition of combustion. Mercury is combusted by the Sun, and that's considered to be unfortunate. But cazimi conjunction is when the two planets, the Sun and the other planet, are really close, within, I think, 17 arc minutes, though different authors come up with different limits. That at that level, the Sun and the other planet are on the same wavelength, so the conjunction is no longer destructive. I'm not sure about that. I think in practice I doubt it. I do think a conjunction between the Sun and Mercury is not fortunate, probably. The Sun simply can undermine Mercury, can damage its objectivity. But we'll explore that later, perhaps when I look at some of the signs where that conjunction is relevant. And the other aspect, if you like, the headline aspect, is Mars trine Saturn. And Mars trine Saturn, again, how does one interpret it? Do you focus on the trine, or do you focus on the fact that Mars and Saturn are the malefics? Trine represents ease. You could say Mars trine Saturn represents the ability to work hard, to really push oneself in a constructive way, not do oneself an injury, unlike, say, Mars square Saturn. But you could say, well, Mars trine Saturn, things happen easily. Bad things happen easily, perhaps, with Mars trine Saturn. And it is difficult to know how it's going to work. And I will be looking at a few horoscopes of people who have this aspect, Mars trine Saturn. And I'll also be looking at some events which took place under this aspect's influence. So you can see a moon in Cancer weekend, noon, New York time. Moon was at 10 degrees Cancer. At noon, Sydney time, as a representative of Australia and New Zealand, the moon is at 1 Cancer. So that means that if you are in Australia, New Zealand, East Asia, then really Saturday is a moon in Gemini day. The moon is in Gemini all of Saturday. And Sunday is a moon in Cancer day. So if you are in Australasia, you might see quite a sharp distinction between Saturday and Sunday. Saturday could be a little bit lighter because the moon is in Gemini. You've still got those 5 planets in air signs, but on Sunday, just things could be more emotional and perhaps a little more serious. And then there is the heliocentric picture. So here is the heliocentric chart, putting the Sun at the center of the solar system. And here's the chart. I'm not saying anything too dramatic is going on, but there's Mercury at 1957 Aquarius. So what Mercury's opposition the Earth 2021 Leo, Mercury moving towards that opposition of the Earth. So that Mercury opposition Earth is just telling us what we know in a geocentric chart, because when geocentrically the Sun is conjunct Mercury, heliocentrically Earth is opposition Mercury. So you just think about the solar system. We think about the solar system as from an Earth's perspective, and we think about Mercury being relatively close to Earth because you think about which planets are where, and you think you've got Mercury is the closest to the Sun, then Venus, then Earth. But when you've got a heliocentric Earth-Mercury opposition, that means you've got the Earth on one side of the Sun, you've got Mercury on the other side of the Sun. So the Sun is right between Mercury and the Earth. So Mercury and Earth are in totally different places. We're poles apart. And so Mercury is about thought and thinking and what we say, and the Earth is how we have to deal with life on planet Earth. And so it might be a case with Earth opposition Mercury. I know it's the same as Sun conjunct Mercury, but it kind of seems more descriptive to me, Mercury opposition Earth. Ideas which don't make sense. Ideas which don't fit in with realities down here on Earth. People saying things maybe which are inappropriate. So that is certainly a possibility. But there is a way forward, a way round it, because it's not just the fact that you've got Earth opposition Mercury. You've got the Earth making a sextile to Jupiter. And through Sunday into Monday, the Earth will be making a sextile to Jupiter. Mercury will be making a trine to Jupiter. And Jupiter perhaps is about some kind of resolution. Jupiter is a fortunate planet, and perhaps through our vision and our open-mindedness, we can take an idea or a concept which is totally alien, totally weird, and which other people to begin with just can't handle. We can take this concept and somehow with Jupiter we can transform it, and we can allow everyone to see the positive side. And in fact, we have got a larger configuration starting to form if you sort of pan out and you look at the overall structure and of the thing. It's not just that you've got Jupiter's actually starting to make a sextile to Chiron. Mercury is starting to make a sextile to Chiron. The Earth is making a trine to Chiron, and so this formation is saying something quite profound. Maybe it is quite challenging, because now we've got the involvement of Chiron. It does indicate that ideas that are radical, that might on the surface be upsetting, can actually be beneficial. And even with Chiron's involvement, they can be somewhat healing. And that's the heliocentric picture. So there is quite a lot going on there. And now it's time to look at the 12 signs. So these are my forecasts for the weekend of February the 8th and 9th, 2025. Aries. Aries, it's a kind of mixed weekend. I mean, the weekend starts for many of us with the moon in Cancer. I mean, especially if you're in... let me start again. With the moon in Gemini. Especially if you're in Australia, New Zealand. There is a Gemini start to the weekend, so it might start off in a way that not a great deal appears to be happening, and that could be the case even if you're in Europe Saturday morning. But soon enough, the moon does move into Cancer, and Aries, with the moon moving into Cancer, you are going to value your boundaries. This weekend is going to be special for you. You're going to want to be in control. You're not going to want to be interrupted. You're not going to want to be interrupted, and you may not take kindly to outside disturbances. And the moon in Cancer is starting to make a conjunction to Mars. So this weekend we therefore have Moon-Mars conjunction in Cancer. And this represents to me, Aries, a time when you really are quite defensive and you really want to look after your own interests. And if you're working in particular, you might regard this weekend as being very special, and you don't want outside factors getting in your way. And so some people might be advised to stay out of your way, because Moon conjunct Mars, it's quite an aggressive combination if someone tries to test your boundaries. And we've also got Mercury quincunx Mars. So Mercury at 19 Aquarius is making a quincunx to Mars, and again, that's about irritation. Something annoying you. You don't like the way things are going, and you have to respond. And that's especially the case on Saturday. So Aries, in some respects, you could be a difficult person to deal with, but only if you put yourself in a position where you are forced to be difficult. It might be a good idea, Aries, if you just did everyone else a favour and were completely selfish right from the beginning. If you try to meet people halfway, if you try to give people a chance, if you go somewhere you don't really want to go to, but you're just being polite about it, then you're asking for trouble, because you're just creating a situation where you're going to get annoyed, and you just may not be able to help yourself. You may just say something that upsets people. Someone may say something back. So Aries, the overall message is, don't do it if you don't want to do it. Don't even start to do it if you don't want to do it. If you want to be completely unselfish, Aries, actually, be selfish. But yeah, be selfish right from the beginning. And if you are in your own space, doing what you want to do, you can actually feel a great sense of happiness and contentment and focus. And maybe that is because we have a trine between Mars and Saturn. Mars, your ruler, making this trine to Saturn, which is, it is a very focused aspect. It's about self-discipline, and it's having a chance to do what you want to do and to give it your best shot. And the less disturbed you are, the better. And when you are not disturbed, you can really tune into who you are, what you can do, what your various abilities are, and get a real sense of it. And also, it might actually be a good time in certain situations to ensure that you are relevant. Think about what creates relevance at the moment, in a changing world. And some things you're interested in may not be particularly relevant, but other things are totally relevant. And the more you practice them, the more relevant you feel. And so that Aries is, I would have said, really positive. But with Mars trine Saturn, it's difficult to really generalize about what this trine is. It's tempting to say that trine is a fortunate aspect, and saying, well, if you put in the work, you get the result. I mean, that is a pretty standard way of interpreting Mars trine Saturn. But you could say, well, Mars trine Saturn, well, trine is just a trine. I mean, trine is just an aspect. It's a connection. And Saturn can be the planet of frustration, things not working for you. And that might be how Mars trine Saturn manifests. But I think that Mars trine Saturn is really only going to be a negative if you put yourself in places where you're not happy. As I was saying earlier on in this piece on Aries, if you do things you don't want to do, you're going to start feeling really frustrated. But if you are selfish right from the beginning, you concentrate on what matters, you don't take risks, then I think Aries, this Mars trine Saturn, should really work in your favor. Taurus, it's a good thing that the moon is moving into Cancer. Now, there is a special association between Taurus and the moon. The moon might not rule Taurus, but the moon is certainly exalted in Taurus. So that does give a relationship between Taurus and the moon. And so when the moon moves into Cancer, when the moon moves into its own sign, Taurus feels better. I don't think you were entirely comfortable with the moon moving through Gemini. And with the moon moving out of Gemini, it's just easier to relax, and do try to relax. The moon is making a square to Venus, so that moon square Venus, you've got Venus in Aries, in a fairly low profile sign in your chart. You kind of want to do things slowly. You shouldn't have to be in a hurry. I understand that Venus in Aries, there is a certain impulsiveness to it. You might feel that you really want to get certain things moving, but really it is the weekend. Is there so much that has to be done, Taurus? Probably not. And so with Venus, moon trine Venus, don't push it. And don't be overindulgent. Certain danger of overindulgence with moon square Venus. You just want to enjoy yourself in your own way, and that's fine, but you don't want to engage in excessive emoting or excessive expenditure or anything like that with moon square Venus. And moon in Cancer does allow you to communicate pretty well. I think the words will come out, but it's not that you'll be talking too much. It's rather you'll just understand what's happening emotionally, and you are sort of not going to overreact, and don't feel you have to say it. And really, Taurus, try to focus on what is easy and what makes you feel comfortable without getting yourself into trouble. Sometimes, for example, it's easy to spend money. I'm not talking about that kind of easy. Just make yourself feel comfortable and don't put yourself under strain. And that does matter. If you do put yourself under strain, then you may not take kindly to it, and strain could come from other people. Not everyone is on your wavelength. Some people could make your life miserable if you give them a chance, and that means that you probably should avoid certain people who've been a problem in the past, and just enjoy your own company, enjoy the company of people who you care about. And this chart, by the way, I should probably be looking at the chart for rather than Sydney. I should probably be switching to the New York chart. I think that's probably a little bit better. So there we go. So so with the moon moving towards Mars, making conjunction to Mars, Taurus, as the weekend progresses, there could be a few threats to your peace of mind here, because moon conjunct Mars, it is a difficult aspect. And okay, it might be a very assertive aspect, but it might be about a person who believes they are right. I talked about Guido Bonatus and what Guido Bonatus said about the Moon-Mars aspect, and saying, oh, the woman is always right, I'll warrant. But maybe it's not just about a gender thing. It may be, in this case, another person is always right, I'll warrant. Of course, what Bonatus is saying is not that that the other person actually is right. By saying I warrant, he's basically saying it's probably in your best interests to take the view that the other person is right, even if they are completely wrong. And so that could be a manifestation of how that Moon-Mars works. I think that Bonatus's quotation would probably be more appropriate and more telling if you were a man and you're having to deal with a woman. If you're a woman and you're having to deal with another woman, then maybe that could indicate a little bit of a misunderstanding, or someone insisting that they are right. Moon conjunct Mars, but Moon conjunct Mars may also be about travel, not long distance travel, short distance travel. And so if you are moving around, moving from place to place with this moon conjunct Mars, it may be surprisingly frustrating. It could be that a short journey, which seems to be easy, completely straightforward, turns out to be a complete nightmare. Maybe there's a traffic jam or mechanical problems, or it could just be annoying. So you go somewhere, you think it's a nice thing to do, you visit someone, and moon conjunct Mars, it just doesn't work out. So, perhaps, Taurus, you should be careful about where you go to. Do you really have to go somewhere? I mean, it may seem harmless, but once you get there, it may not be as pleasant as you had expected. Now, one thing about other people, I mean, I've already talked about other people, and in terms of this moon conjunct Mars, we also have Mars trine Saturn, and Mars trine Saturn might be about people who are hardworking. They've got things to do and they don't want anyone in their way. That's one way it could work. But it could also be about people who are difficult. I mean, it might be a trine between Mars and Saturn, but it's an aspect between Mars and Saturn. Saturn can be problematic, and it just may be that some people require a lot of attention, or they force you to pay them a lot of attention, and they could slow things down, and they may not always be helpful, at least in terms of you enjoying the weekend. So this weekend, try to do what you enjoy doing. Try to have some relaxation. Don't feel pressurized, and don't get over emotional. Though if you do nothing or do very little, and you don't have high expectations of yourself, it should be okay. Gemini. The Sun is conjunct Mercury. Mercury is completely combust. So combustion in astrology represents that condition when a planet is right close to the Sun, within 8 degrees. I mean, that's one approach to combustion. There'll be other numbers, other angular separations that other astrologers think about, but traditionally 8 degrees is what I think about. And this weekend, Mercury and the Sun are 0 degrees apart, absolutely dead on. And there is this question about what that means. Now, if we are negative about it, we could say that you might be overwhelmed because the Sun is just too close, and you may not be able to be objective. You just can't see the wood for the trees, and as a result, it's possible that you make mistakes, you reach the wrong conclusions, and at the same time, you just may feel that there are certain things in your life which are just difficult to handle, that are just blotting things out, perhaps even blotting your own light out. I mean, that's one way of looking at the combustion. But you might also say that the Sun and Mercury are making a cazimi conjunction. So a cazimi conjunction is a conjunction which is exact. And the idea is that as the Sun and Mercury get really close to each other, they kind of reach the same sort of wavelength. It's like walking through the flames, and obviously normally the flames would burn you up, but somehow you're on the same wavelength as the fire for that magic moment while the Sun and Mercury are exactly combust. And so while they're within around 17 minutes of each other, you can walk through the fire, and you just have to make sure you're out of the fire by the time the Sun and Mercury move further away. When you start moving off the wavelength, well, then you get consumed. I mean, please don't take that literally. You cannot walk through fire. You get burnt. It's not a good idea to do. But obviously, I'm talking about it in a symbolic sense. And I'm not telling you which way it's going to work. And I'm a Gemini, so I've perhaps got the same issues as you, and my Sun in Gemini. And so think about what's happening this weekend. Think about a situation this weekend where you are trying to make up your mind, where you're trying to make a judgment. how clear are you? Because if you think you understand something, that doesn't mean you understand it. It may be that your clarity, your feelings of clarity, you're deceiving yourself. So, Gemini, it's incredibly important this weekend that you're self-aware. You're self-aware of a process by which you make decisions, by which you perceive the world around you. Are you able to be truly objective? Are you really on the same wavelength as what's happening around you, or are you making a mistake? And I can't give you an answer to that. You have to consider the situation, on its own merits. But I think to be positive about this Cazimi conjunction, it just may be that there's a moment over the weekend of clarity where things are clear. Things were very chaotic. You felt overwhelmed, and suddenly you're there. It might not last very long, but there's a moment where you understand everything, or just about everything. A moment where the confusion dissipates, where you see the answer. And it might actually be quite a spiritual event, a spiritual moment where you see how things are. Or it could be about ideas. There have been lots of conflicting ideas, people saying this, that, whatever, really difficult to make sense of it. And suddenly it's there. And so I think there is a positive side to this Sun-Mercury conjunction. And you shouldn't be put off by early irritation. Beginning of a weekend, we've got Mercury making a quincunx to the Mars. That Mercury quincunx Mars is quite irritating. So beginning of a weekend, you start to feel irritated. You start to feel that things aren't working. But as you go through the weekend, things happen. Things get confusing. Things start getting confusing, and then yes, there is a moment of absolute clarity. Maybe it's just about things breaking down. Everything goes everywhere, and then suddenly things come together. And use that moment, and also be able to recognize that moment. I mean, that's really important. And in terms of recognition, you have a chance to recognize what is bad and what is good. And that can always be, or often be, a problem for Geminis, because Geminis try to be open-minded. What is good for you, what is bad for you, and sometimes it's difficult to make up your mind, and that can be an issue with other people as well. But you get a sense of what can be trusted and what should absolutely be avoided. So it is an interesting weekend, but I think it can be quite an enlightening weekend. A weekend when you can start to get your priorities right and understand what's important. But it's very important. It's very, very important this weekend, Gemini, that you are self-aware. Cancer. There's no reason why it can't be a good weekend. But I do think it's important that you take things seriously. The main aspect this weekend is arguably a trine between Mars and Saturn. So this trine between Mars and Saturn has been developing over the last few days. And we got sort of Mars in Cancer moving retrograde back towards a trine with Saturn, and Mars is in Cancer, Mars is in your sign, and so if it's trine Saturn, it is a serious influence. It allows you to be fairly self-disciplined and for you to concentrate on the things that matter. And right now we've got the moon moving into Cancer, so the moon is starting to make a conjunction to Mars. It's making a trine to Saturn, and you can feel the build-up to this over the weekend. And hopefully, Cancer, you will take it seriously. And it's an opportunity to get things done in your own way, and also to do the things that are important to you. It's not important to other people necessarily, though that doesn't necessarily mean that other people need be a problem. Mars trine Saturn is a sociable aspect, and Saturn can be seen as another person, and Mars trine Saturn is about your connections with another person, and those connections can actually be very constructive, provided you take the right approach. But it is Saturn, and Mars is about self-assertion, and you want to be able to assert yourself in your own way, and you don't want another person telling you what to do. But if you're put off guard for whatever reason, you could find yourself being pressurized, especially late in the weekend when the moon starts making a trine to Saturn. That might happen, but I'm hopeful, Cancer, but it's going to all be about cooperation, about you and another person having similar priorities and not being in conflict with one another. And indeed, with the right attitude, I do think your various relationships can work very well. But it's always important that things are done on your terms. And we have another aspect. We have the moon square Venus. So moon in Cancer making a square to Venus in Aries. And this moon square Venus, I think, is helpful. I mean, it's an aspect that can sometimes be overindulgent, but not in your hands. I think in your hands you have a sense of what needs to be said and what needs to be done. I don't know what your plans are for the weekend, but if you have plans for the weekend, then you have a chance to really sort of execute them with precision. And this moon square Venus allows you to take other people with you. People will listen to you, they'll understand you, and this sort of underlines the point, Cancer, but it's not a time to be doing things in another person's way. You have your ideas, and you should stick to your ideas. And if you try to compromise or you try too hard to listen to people, then you're just going to get annoyed. And the moon eventually makes a conjunction to Mars, and this moon conjunct Mars, you could say, Cancer, is about you being right. Cancerians, very often do think they are right, and sometimes they're wrong. But in this case, there is a certainty here. Now, I'm not guaranteeing you're right, but provided you've done your research, you probably are right, and in most cases, it's in other people's best interest to just listen to you. You've worked it out, and on an emotional level, it makes sense to you. Not just an emotional level, an intellectual level. It all feels clear, and you understand how things should be evolving. And if anyone contradicts you, then what do you do? Well, what you could do is, you could agree to differ. I mean, that's one approach. But fundamentally, you have a certainty to you, and I think in this case, you are right. Most cases. I mean, I'm not making a guarantee. And anyway, why would anyone want to contradict you or oppose you? I mean, it's just not really worth the effort, is it? And if everyone accepts that you know what you're doing, then things should run smoothly. And in terms of relationships, I've talked about this Mars trine Saturn, and the Moon is making a trine to Saturn. If you're already getting on well with someone, then this weekend you can get on even better with them. So, in that sense, in terms of relationships, it's probably best to stick to people you know and trust. If you try to get involved with people you've never met before, or you don't really know them very well, then there could be problems. And I think that would also be a little bit of a waste of time. So, overall, Cancer, it's a weekend where you're in a strong position, and you really should have a belief in yourself. It's a belief in yourself which I think in most cases is justified. Leo. Over the last couple of days, Leo, you might have not always have been in a great frame of mind, and you might have had concerns about what's happening around you. There may have been doubts, worries, but this weekend I do think that you're calming down a little. You're starting to get a certain sense of perspective, and because you are getting a sense of perspective, you're probably a nicer person to have around. You're more easygoing, and your social skills seem to be better. And social skills, when I talk about social skills, I'm not talking about your social skills in a sort of broad, extroverted, party kind of sense. It's just dealing with people as individuals, and that's something that I think that you can do extremely well. And part of that is your ability to give people space, and that's not something that Leo is always able to do, but I think that this weekend you can do it, and you do need to make a little bit of an effort there. I'm not saying that it's just easy to give people space. You need to be aware of what you're doing, but you can do it. And it does hinge to an extent on the conjunction between the Sun and Mercury. So this weekend there is a conjunction between the Sun and Mercury, which takes place in Aquarius, your opposite sign. And that Sun conjunct Mercury in Aquarius can be about you giving other people time, giving people space, not feeling that you always have to say something, letting other people talk. And that means letting them talk even if you disagree with them or you're not interested. Give people a chance, and that is the right approach. Now, the Sun-Mercury conjunction could work in the other way if you look at the symbolism in the worst possible light, because you could say, well, Sun is you because the Sun rules Leo. It is very close to Mercury. Mercury is combust. So Mercury combust could be someone not being able to express themselves or communicate them because of your larger-than-life personality, but you could sort of block them out. But the Sun is in Aquarius, the Sun is in the 7th house, so I think most Leos are going to be able to let go and give other people a chance. And it actually is important to listen this weekend. It's more important to listen than to talk, because it can be a weekend where you discover things, you learn things, and the best way of learning things is to hear people out. Let them finish their sentence, let them finish their point, and in the process you will be educating yourself, and you'll be in a better position to deal with future challenges, and your ability to listen is going to be very much appreciated, because if you handle things right, your social skills are going to be good, and you can just come over as being a pleasant and actually fairly uncomplicated person. Because I think over the last couple of days you have been a little bit complicated, and there may have been, certain issues that you've been concerned about, but you are starting to relax, and so that means that it can be a pleasant weekend. Just don't try to do too much. The moon will move into Leo soon enough, early next week. I mean, when does the moon move into Leo? Moon moves into Leo on, let's get this right. Moon moves into Leo on February the 10th. So February the 10th, that's Monday. So on Monday, moon moves into Leo. But while the moon is in Cancer, you shouldn't feel that there's anything that you absolutely must do, and you mustn't be obsessed about letting people know who you are, what your message is. That can come later. Right now, it is a time to let go and not feel that you have to be the leader. There is a place for following and for letting other people have their say, and that really is the key to it. That is the key to having a good weekend. Virgo. One of the big aspects over the weekend is a conjunction between the Sun and Mercury. We've also got a quincunx between Mercury and Mars. So, in fact, if we think about those two aspects, Mercury quincunx Mars and Sun conjunct Mercury, we might get the sense that you're under a certain amount of pressure, because Mercury's under pressure, and there may be things going on which actually could be quite challenging. So we need to think what might that be. And Virgo is quite a health orientated sign. Virgos have a good sense of their body, how they relate to their environment, what they eat, what they breathe. It's all contributing to your health and well-being. And with this Sun conjunct Mercury and Mercury quincunx Mars, if one looks at these two aspects in a negative sense, Virgo, there might be things which are not being helpful health-wise, in terms of what you're breathing in, what you're eating, even who you're with. You have to consider the emotional environment. So, the quincunx. If we start with the Mercury quincunx Mars, some astrologers have associated the quincunx 150-degree aspect with health and challenges to health. And with Mercury quincunx Mars, there are irritations, especially at the beginning of a weekend, things happening that you don't really want them to happen, and it just may be that things make you angry, and if you're feeling angry, then that undermines your health and well-being. I mean, that must be the case, or at least that may be the case. And it is possibly a good idea if you're very careful about your company. Some people are bad for you. Maybe they're not bad for you all the time, but this weekend they could be bad for you. And if you spend time in their company, you might just feel ill. Again, I don't want to exaggerate, but you just might feel that they're draining you, and do you want them around? And And then we've got Mercury making a conjunction to the Sun. And again, there is something that could undermine you if you gave it the chance. But with the Cazimi conjunction to the Sun, when the Mercury is exactly conjunct the Sun, there may be a sense of awareness, and it may occur to you, perhaps for the first time, that something really is bad for you, and you don't want to have it around anymore. And so you could say that the Cazimi conjunction Mercury to the Sun really could work in your favour, because it's giving you awareness, and the awareness just suddenly comes together. There are moments of confusion, uncertainty, you don't know what's going on, and then it's clear, right in front of you. Something's bad for you. Someone is bad for you. And after that, you know exactly what to do. It's all obvious. And so that's something Virgo that you should look out for. And so if we're thinking about it in terms of awareness, then it might actually be a very good weekend. You don't overload it. You're observant, and you watch how people behave. You watch how you behave. You constantly monitor how you feel, physically and psychologically, and those feelings are giving you information. They're giving you information about what is good for you. So this may be all about what these planets in Aquarius are. Pluto's now in Aquarius. It's been in Aquarius since November. The Sun and Mercury are making a conjunction in Aquarius, and the sign Aquarius can be about just your awareness of your body and what's good for your body. And Pluto reacts. That's what Pluto can do. I mean, Pluto can be associated with the immune system, and if you find yourself reacting to something, then you know what's happening, you know what's going on, and you can be sure. So that is a major theme of the weekend. And also, just in terms of other people matter, and other people can't be avoided, and you're going to just get a good awareness of which people are good for you, which people are bad for you. And one word, a key word that's often associated with Virgo, at least in terms of discrimination. In terms of keywords, is this word discrimination. And when I was learning astrology, the key thing to one of the things about learning astrology is you learn keywords, because when you're trying to learn what the signs mean, what the planets mean, you start with the keywords. And a keyword with Virgo is discrimination. And of course that doesn't mean discrimination against other people. It's discrimination in terms of what is good, what is bad. And that in a way is Virgo working very well. And over the weekend, you really can discriminate between what is good for you, Virgo, physically and psychologically, and what is bad for you. And we're not just talking about inanimate objects, we're talking about people. Some people are bad for you, other people are very good for you. And over the weekend, you can distinguish between the two. Libra, there is a conjunction between the Moon and Mars forming over the weekend, and this Moon-Mars conjunction does become exact towards the end of the weekend. I mean, okay, it could be into Monday if you're in Australia and New Zealand. But the Moon-Mars conjunction is, I would have said, fairly motivating. You have a sense of what's important, and it's an emotional sense, not just an intellectual sense. And if you're doing something that is important, that is affirming of your individuality, then so much the better. And so don't allow yourself to be distracted. I mean, you could be distracted. The moon does make a square of Venus. Venus, your ruler, is in Aries. Aries is, of course, your opposite sign. And so there may be times over the weekend when you give other people too much attention. They want attention, you overdo it, and you find there's no time left for yourself. So Libra, do consider, what is important for you, and if necessary, be tough about it. There is a certain toughness about the weekend, and you can pursue certain things with a grim determination. You know that something has to be done, and it's tough, and you can get round those distractions, and in the process it's possible that you hurt someone's feelings. I mean, that could happen, but it doesn't matter within reason. And so Libra, really do try to look after yourself, and that toughness, does matter. If you're easygoing, you're relaxed, you do what people say, then I think it just could turn out into being a somewhat unsatisfactory weekend, where you might even feel that you're being taken advantage of, and that is one of the dangers of Venus being in Aries. While Venus is in Aries, while Venus has very little strength, and let's not forget, Venus is starting to slow down. Venus is going to be retrograde sooner or later, and so when Venus goes retrograde, that represents you having to reconsider things. And so at the moment, with Venus slowing down in Aries, obviously in Aries in your opposite sign, when other people make suggestions, tell you what to do, whatever, there's just a danger that you do what you're told, and that would be so unsatisfactory. But again, it is unnecessary, and you shouldn't be afraid of having a little bit of a conflict or even a fight. It is the case, Libra, that sometimes you have to stand up for your own interests, and also you've got to make the most of the fact that the Sun and Mercury are still in Aquarius. Aquarius, it's a very creative place for the Sun and Mercury, and of course Pluto is there as well. It's a time when you should be thinking about what is important to you, and not let outside forces interrupt your flow. But I do think it would be so unnecessary. But don't assume that everyone is your enemy. That is not the case. And one of the main aspects this weekend is a trine between Mars and Saturn, and Mars is a planet which does have relevance to other people because it rules Aries, but Mars can be a person who is helpful, who is motivating, and so you maybe have to make the right choices, decide who is useless, who is just worse than useless, and who can actually be a motivator for you, someone who understands you, who understands your priorities. And so that Mars trine Saturn, which is so linked with Venus at the moment. I mean, if you want to get technical about it, the Mars is at 18, 19 Cancer. Mars is at 18 Cancer. Saturn is at 18 Cancer. The Mars-Saturn midpoint is at 18 Taurus, obviously because Taurus is right between Pisces and Cancer, and Venus is semi-square the Mars-Saturn midpoint. So Venus is strongly impacted by that Mars and Saturn, and it is about you being tough, but it's also about you recognizing that some people can be helpful. Maybe it's just one person deciding who they are, and at the same time not letting anyone push their luck. Maybe it's a case where someone can be helpful for a short period of time, but they can't be helpful all weekend. So this might encourage you to use people a little bit. I mean, it's not a good idea to use people, I mean, as a general principle, but sometimes you've got something you want to do, you can't do it on your own for a short period of time. You might need another person's help and advice. You get that help and advice, and then you can go back to doing things on your own once you've learned what you have to do. And that means, Libra, it might be a case this weekend where you should be a little bit selfish, where you should look after your own interests. It is okay. Because if you go the other way and if you ignore your own interests, well, you could be overwhelmed. Scorpio. Mars is making a trine to Saturn. This aspect this weekend, it is exact, and I do regard it as being an important aspect. And indeed, later in this video, I have a section on Mars trine Saturn, and this Mars trine Saturn has been building up over the last few days, and now you get it. And there is then the question of, is this aspect good or bad? I am of the view that this aspect should be good. It's a trine. It's a fortunate influence, and it's in water signs as well. So you've got Mars in Cancer, you've got Saturn in Pisces, and then the empty water sign is of course Scorpio, which is your sign. And so this Mars trine Saturn is going to really allow you to get yourself together. So as you go into the weekend, you might be thinking of all the things you'd like to do, all the things you haven't done, various feelings of obligation and responsibility, and you're thinking, well, now's your chance to really get going on it all, and to be quite single-minded. Now, there could be some irritations, especially at the beginning of a weekend, because at the beginning of a weekend we have Mercury quincunx Mars. So Mercury in Aquarius. It is about the mind. It's about what you're thinking about, who you're talking about. And Mercury quincunx Mars can be about stressful thoughts, stressful communication, stressful conversations, and it might represent a distraction. Perhaps a member of your family is bothering you, or someone else is saying something and you're not interested, that someone is demanding your attention. Try to get over it. Don't allow yourself to be caught, because what should matter is not Mercury quincunx Mars. It should be that Mars trine Saturn, and really making the most of it. And ideally, Scorpio, you will have a goal this weekend, something you really want to achieve, and it's important to you, and you won't stop until you get it. So what is it? What would you like to have completed by the end of the weekend? Because I think with this Mars trine Saturn, you certainly can do it. You can achieve it, though it might not be completely fun, because it's serious. You're dealing maybe with something which is usually fun. It's something you enjoy. It's something that's important to you. But right now, things are perhaps a little too intense to be thinking about enjoyment, and it's all light and easy. It's a serious business, and so that could be how the Mars trine Saturn is working. Indeed, it's how Mars trine Saturn should be working. Now, one warning about Mars trine Saturn, well, a couple of warnings about Mars trine Saturn. I mean, Mars is aspecting Saturn. Yeah, it's a trine, but it's an aspect. So Mars aspecting Saturn could be about something turning up which is a frustration. And your job is to get through that frustration. And clearly you can get through that frustration. That frustration. And with Mars trine Saturn, it can be a dangerous aspect. So don't do anything crazy which could physically be physically damaging with Mars trine Saturn, or indeed mentally damaging, because a trine, you could say, well, trine is easy energy, so it's easy energy to cause damage. So if you're doing something physical, you're trying to mend something, you're using sharp objects or whatever, you put in too much energy, and something happens quickly, and you could do yourself an injury, but it's unnecessary. And then a word for a fairly small minority of Scorpios, probably the kind of Scorpio that actually isn't watching this video. And there is a small minority of Scorpios who can be, and I haven't come across them recently. I haven't actually come across them for decades, but they do exist. And this small minority of Scorpios can be super hedonistic. They can put enjoyment, not just enjoyment, but hedonistic pleasure at the center of their existence. And they can be really, really serious about having fun. It's a really serious business, having fun and pushing themselves to the absolute limit in their desire to find this ecstasy of enjoyment. And Mars trine Saturn might encourage that, and it might actually encourage some Scorpios to take things too far. But again, I don't think you're this kind of Scorpio, but I don't think that kind of Scorpio has the patience to listen to this, has the patience to listen to this channel, to listen to what I'm talking about. But maybe if you know a Scorpio like this, maybe if you're not a Scorpio, there's another Scorpio who fits this bill. It's taking something so far that it could be completely self-destructive. I mean, I'm thinking of, all-night parties where reckless hedonism is the order of the day. In that case, Mars trine Saturn could actually be a super dangerous aspect. But don't worry, I'm sure that doesn't relate to you. Sagittarius. Sagittarius, it's probably a weekend where you would like to do things slowly. You're not in too much of a hurry, and what you'd probably like is to gain a certain perspective. That's always important, and you can't get a perspective if you're too close to something. If you're in the middle, and if you're in the middle of the action, you just don't know what's going on. And I think that you're pretty aware of this. And Sagittarius, you appear to have a good sense of self-preservation, and you're probably in the mood to let other people take the action, take the risks. And for your part, you can just consider things, and don't forget the material dimension, particularly the monetary dimension, because the moon is moving through Cancer, and it's moving towards a conjunction of Mars. And so Cancer in the Aquarian chart can be about money, money that is slightly complicated money, perhaps money, but involves other people. Cancer can be a sign in the Sagittarius chart which is related to joint finances, not personal finances, but joint finances. And with the moon making a conjunction to Mars, there might be scope for financial disagreement if you and another person have some kind of shared financial relationship. And with the moon making a conjunction to Mars, and it also makes a trine to Saturn. So if you are very mature and sensible about it, and if the other person is as well, then it's possible that you can have some sort of meaningful discussion where everything is brought out into the open and is made clear. So that would be a good way of using the weekend. You just want everything to be easier, and if things are easier, then that's good for everyone. And if you want things to be easy, then ask yourself, what is making things complicated? I mean, some things could be complicated, and so why not deal with it now, when you have the chance? Now, thinking about other people, it would certainly be nice if other people were reasonable and mature, and they understood what was going on. But is this anything you can guarantee? Mercury is ruler of Gemini, your opposite sign, and Mercury actually is under a certain amount of pressure. The weekend starts with Mercury being quincunx Mars, 150-degree aspect to Mars, and then Mercury is starting to move towards a conjunction of the Sun. And it just may be the case that some people in your life don't always know what they're doing. I mean, they might think they know what they're doing, and they might be raging around and making pronouncements, giving the impression that they know what they're doing, that they've thought things through, but have they really thought things through? Not necessarily. And certain people may be just overwhelmed. There might be something literally combusting them, Mercury conjunct Sun. I mean, obviously not literally combusting them, but some huge concept they're trying to deal with. They can't deal with it, and they can't think straight, and they're making mistakes, and they're saying things that don't make sense. So going back to what I was saying about having discussions with money about another person, that could be difficult, because you are the one who has clarity. The other person doesn't necessarily have clarity. And if you are having a discussion with someone, and it's tempting to let the other person have their say, particularly if they're very sure of themselves. But I don't think that's a good idea. If you are having good discussions, ideally it should be you making the decisions rather than the other person making the decisions, or perhaps there should be no decision at all. I mean, that would be fine, though part of what you're trying to do this weekend is to make things less complicated. And sometimes the best way to make things less complicated is to make a decision. But you don't want to make things less complicated just for the sake of it. Some people make decisions to make things less complicated, and then the decision turns out to be a disaster. So you do have to consider the situation. And if you can't make a decision, then perhaps a decision shouldn't be made. We should wait until a more propitious time. But it is so easy at the moment to be fooled by another person's certainty, when really, if anyone's going to be certain, it's you. And even then, you might have your doubts. So it's a somewhat complicated weekend, especially if you have to deal with a lot of people, or even one person. One person can be enough to make your weekend complicated. And if you're able to have this weekend being, or run this weekend with you at a certain distance from the outside world, well, that might be best. Capricorn. The moon has changed signs. The moon is out of Gemini, or is moving out of Gemini, and with the moon moving out of Gemini, you may be quite happy about that. I mean, moon in Gemini from a Capricorn perspective is possibly not the best place of the moon to be. Gemini and Capricorn are signs that don't always have a lot to do with each other, and with the moon moving into Cancer, you're certainly becoming more aware, and so you have a greater understanding of what's going on around you, and you have an increased level of empathy. You understand what's bothering people. You can see things from other people's point of view, though you don't want to take that thing. You don't want to take it too far. I mean, you do have to consider your own interests and your own priorities. But it's so often the case that if you want to get your way, you have to understand other people's limitations, because if you don't take into account other people's limitations, then you're not going to get very far. And the main aspect this weekend, though, is not the moon making a conjunction to Mars, because that's what happened. The moon does start making a conjunction to Mars at the end of a weekend. That's not the main aspect. The main aspect is a trine between Mars and Saturn. And if you've been listening to what I've been saying to some of the other signs, you'll have perhaps noticed that I'm somewhat uncertain about this trine between Mars and Saturn, and I'll be talking about these uncertainties further at the end of this video when I really look at this Mars-Saturn trine in detail. And the issue with the Mars-Saturn trine is that it is a trine, a fortunate aspect, but Mars and Saturn are the malefics. Saturn is the greater malefic, Mars is a lesser malefic, and of course Saturn is your ruler. And so what does that mean? I would have said that this Mars-Saturn trine will actually work for you because you understand it. Saturn is your ruler, it's trine Mars. Mars is a very energetic influence, and Mars certainly energizes you, and it gives you the ability to really advocate for what is important to you. You do know how to look after your own interests, and you can do it very powerfully in such a way that there really doesn't have to be a conflict. You will, I think, have a certain ability to express yourself. I'm not going to say that you've got a way with words. That would be completely wrong, because that would suggest that you can just keep spinning words. It's not about spinning words. It's just about being able to express a message clearly, a message that people listen to and it's obvious. And that might be how Mars trine Saturn works. And then the moon is making a trine to Saturn, then the moon moves on to making a conjunction to Mars. So, moon making a conjunction to Mars, making a trine to Saturn, does give you empathy. It also gives you power, and it really allows you to have an influence. And people are going to listen to you this weekend, and over the course of the weekend they're going to listen to you more and more. And one of the reasons they're going to be listening to you is because you're going to be listening to them, and you're going to be able to understand their perspective, and you're not going to come over as being a threat. It is in some respects, a difficult weekend for many people, not for Capricorns, I don't think. And some people are unsure of themselves. And it's quite possible, Capricorn, that you can take advantage of other people's uncertainty. And this Mars trine Saturn, it's an aspect that could go in many different ways, but I think this aspect is an aspect that in many respects is tailor-made for you. It should really help you assert your authority. Though I have to give one warning about it. Mars is aspecting Saturn. Mars can represent an accident or a mishap, and it's unnecessary. It needn't happen, but it's not a weekend for doing anything that is physically risky with Mars trine Saturn. I mean, very simply, it's a trine. So Mars and Saturn, they have an easy way of getting in touch with each other. And yeah, it would be good if you could symbolize Mars as being assertion, but if you think about Mars as being an accident or an injury, well, it's easy to happen. But it's only easy to happen if you put yourself in the firing line, if you put yourself in a dangerous situation. But Capricorn, that's not something you're going to do. And so because of that, it looks like being a great weekend for you. Aquarius. There is a conjunction between the Sun and Mercury, and this conjunction is in Aquarius. And it's a conjunction that is certainly very sure of itself. And you may feel that you absolutely have the answers. It's suddenly becoming clear, and you may be right. The answers that you've been looking for, it's all finally come together, and you're sure about what you're doing and where you're going. But how sure? 100% sure? I would not advise you to be 100% sure. Maybe 75% sure. Be ready to ask yourself questions, to play devil's advocate with your own conclusions. Consider what might go wrong. Also, consider where you might have jumped to conclusions, because somewhere along the line you might have jumped to conclusions, and you now might have got yourself into a position where you're so sure of yourself that you just can't consider alternative possibilities. But you certainly give the impression of being sure of yourself with this Sun conjunct Mercury, as if there is no doubt. And I think in many cases people are going to believe you. Are they right to believe you? Are they really right to believe you? Well, that's a question for you. And aside from that Sun conjunct Mercury, we do have a trine between Mars and Saturn. And this Mars trine Saturn has a direct impact on you. I mean, Saturn is your ruler, Mars is trine Saturn, so that could suggest that you are fairly assertive, which supports what I was just saying about Sun-Mercury conjunction in Aquarius. You get your way. You can get your way. It doesn't take much, and as the weekend progresses, it's just easier to get your way because the Moon is making a trine to Saturn, the Moon is making a conjunction to Mars. And you then have to ask, is it a good thing that you get your way? Well, it would not be a good thing if you're not sure of your facts. It would be a good thing if you have left no stone unturned. And this is something that you very much can do. With Mars trine Saturn, Moon making the aspects to Mars and Saturn, leave no stone unturned. Really ask the question again. Are you absolutely sure of yourself? Are you so sure of yourself that you're prepared to tell people what to do, and you're prepared to give people advice? And that should be the yardstick, because if something goes wrong, then you might have to take responsibility. But maybe Aquarius, it's a case where you really are sure of yourself. But are you the only one who is sure of themselves? I mean, are people really ready to take your advice? The Sun does make a conjunction to Mercury, and the Sun could represent another person, and Sun conjunct Mercury could represent another person who has a lot to say for themselves, and another person who is actually in a process of change. The Sun and Mercury, something I haven't mentioned is that the Sun and Mercury are both at around 20, between 20 and 21 Aquarius. And so what this means is that the Sun and Mercury are changing decan. And in terms of changing the decan, let's just make sure that I know which decan the Sun and Mercury are moving into. That's always a good idea. Sorry, let me just check. The Sun and Mercury are both moving into the decan of the Moon, and so that does represent a little bit of a change, moving into the decan of the Moon. Because remember, you divide each sign by 3, and it's just interesting when the Sun and Mercury both move into a moon-ruled decan, and the Moon is in Cancer. And so this might mean actually that some people are maybe becoming a little more emotional than usual, the Sun and Mercury being in a moon-ruled decan. And so watch out for that change. And you might have made assumptions about certain people in your life and how they're going to behave. And with the Sun moving into the last 10 degrees of Aquarius, along with Mercury, there is an emotionality there, but it may be hidden. It may be hidden as rationality. So you might come across someone who is being very rational. They seem to have their facts right. But actually, underneath it all, there is a strong emotional compulsion which is guiding what they're saying. And so be aware of that. I mean, just because there's an emotional compulsion doesn't mean it's wrong, but it illustrates the point that when you and other people are discussing things with each other, you may be coming from completely different points of view, and that different point of view may not be immediately obvious. But going back to what I was saying about your certainty, I think you do have certainty. I think in the end you can get your way, and in the process of getting your way, you do have to be very sure of yourself, and you have to be very sure of anyone who you are able to persuade, because their concerns may not be as straightforward as they seem. And if you ignore emotional realities, if you ignore another person's emotional realities, then in the end things might not work out as expected. Pisces, there is a trine aspect between Mars and Saturn, and I've been going on and on about this Mars trine Saturn, but I do think that this Mars trine Saturn is the most important event this weekend astrologically. And in the Pisces chart, Saturn's in your sign. Mars is making a trine to Saturn, and with this Mars trine Saturn, you could conceive it as being quite a serious aspect, wanting to work hard on something, making sure that everything is absolutely perfect. And of course, perfection is an impossible ideal, but you want to do your best. And if you're going to do something over the weekend, Pisces, I think you're going to want to do it well. And you may want to actually do it punishingly well. You might kind of overdo it a little. But in the process, I think that you can create something of real value. And so we might get a feeling here that, we think about creativity as something that is fun, something that we enjoy, but there is a seriousness to it as well. And I think that Pisces, you are really able to tune into this seriousness, and also Pisces, you want to do something that is really different. You absolutely don't want to do things in the same old way. You don't want to copy what other people do. You want to do something that is a genuine expression of who you are, and what makes you unique, and what makes you perhaps even revolutionary. And it doesn't just come from who you are, this uniqueness. It comes from an interaction between you and the cosmos and the environment. You perceive things in a way that is different, and you notice things that other people don't notice, and you can bring all this down to earth in terms of whatever you are doing. When I say down to earth, remember, there are no planets in earth signs except for Uranus, and there can be an advantage of no planets being in earth signs, because the earth can constrain and there are no constraints. And so bringing things down to earth means making something, creating something, but without the normal material constraints. And so Pisces, that could allow you to do something that is really great, really spectacular. And as far as other people are concerned, well, they certainly like your company. You're certainly an interesting person, though don't feel that you have to take other people too seriously. Don't take what anyone says at face value. Mercury is making a conjunction to the Sun. Mercury is also making a quincunx to Mars. Some people, they think they've got all the answers. They might even think they know better than you in some cases, but they don't. They're just overwhelmed by things which they shouldn't really be overwhelmed about. In fact, it may just be the wrong detail. People, so if you get criticism for whatever reason, or if someone tries to get your attention, they may actually be talking about something which is just of no value, but they may be just taking some detail, some small little thing, and blowing it out of all proportion, trying to make it a big deal, perhaps even trying to get your attention and trying to push you off your track. But I think in most cases other people can be ignored. I don't think anyone is saying anything of real value. Not really. At least in a relative sense. I think you're the one who has the value. You're the one that understands what's important, and don't let anyone else contradict you. And now I want to look at the weekend from the viewpoint of the I Ching. So I asked the question, what is the weekend going to be like for those watching the I Ching section of this video? Now, one thing, if you watch these videos a lot, you might regard it as being really boring that I just say, what is the weekend going to be like for those watching the I Ching section of this video? And that might sound really tedious. But I think with the I Ching, indeed with any oracle, you have to make it clear what you are asking. And you have to really write it down. I think that is important. If it's a horary question, I don't know if you're, I don't know, I suppose if you're doing a tarot, you write it down, because if you write it down, you know what you're asking and you know what the limits of your question are. And other questions might come to mind and they might distract you, but by writing it down, you're making it clear what you're asking, and most importantly, or just as importantly, you're making it clear what you're not asking. So my question is, what is the weekend going to be like for those watching the I Ching section of this video? And every word in that question counts. And the first hexagram I got was hexagram 44, coming to meet. And you can see, if you just look at that hexagram, it doesn't look great, does it? Without even knowing what it is. I mean, it just looks unbalanced. Having that broken line at the bottom, that does create a certain sense of instability. And this hexagram is all about a warning about other people. Other people are trying to impinge themselves on us. They're trying to get in our way. They are trying perhaps even to undermine our independence. They're telling us what to do. They might be people who are kind of easy to bring into our lives to begin with. They don't seem to represent much of a threat, but once they're there, then they can cause a lot of problems, and we might actually start to lose our independence with this hexagram coming to meet. And so in a raw form, there is a warning here. As you move into the weekend, you need to be very wary of other people, and not just not do what you're told, not necessarily invite them into your life, invite them into your home, because once someone is there, they may be difficult to get rid of, and then they may start to have more and more of an influence, and then you might lose touch with who you are, and you might find it's no longer you calling the shots. Now, there is a moving line, and the moving line is the fifth, and the fifth line in I Ching, the fifth line from the bottom, tends to be quite fortunate. And this is indeed the case with this fifth line. And the fifth line symbolically refers to something which is covered. It could be a fruit like a melon or a gourd, and it's covered. Perhaps it's covered with leaves. Perhaps it's covered by a tree. Something is shielding it. And one interpretation of this would be to say, well, don't discard everyone. Don't give up on humanity. Yes, other people are trying to worm their way into your confidence, and they're up to no good. But maybe with this fifth line moving, some people, even if they are up to no good, or at least if they are, the I Ching likes to use this word, I mean, don't take this too seriously, inferior elements. Just because you're dealing with inferior elements doesn't mean that they can't be changed. And so there is a prospect of something happening which is kind of transforming, being able to influence people, and people who you thought were a problem actually could be advantageous because of your influence. So that's one way of looking at this fifth line moving. Another approach is to say, well, if you are in a situation where your independence is perhaps being undermined, people want to get in touch with you, they want to get involved in your life, you maybe don't want to encourage them. And so we then get the idea of something being hidden. We don't reveal everything about ourselves, because the more we reveal about ourselves, the more vulnerable we become. So hence we're talking about these hidden fruits. And so we need to keep back our own abilities, talents. It's not a time for boasting. And there is also an indication that if we don't boast about our talents, that's lucky for us. We get some kind of blessing, some heavenly blessing. We're not supposed. The more modest we are, the more we keep our abilities to ourselves, then the luckier we are. And so we might not feel good that we're having to keep something back, but it's actually the right thing to do. And of course, if we keep something back, and other people are trying to worm their way into our confidence, we're kind of discouraging them. We're not giving anything away. We're keeping who we are hidden. And that might be the best way to maintain our independence. And so the fifth line moves, and then fifth line moves. That means we move to a different hexagram. So the hexagram we then move to is hexagram number 50, which is the cauldron. So the cauldron is a very powerful hexagram, and it's about alchemy. It's about bringing everything together, and this links back to these hidden fruits, the things that we're keeping to ourselves and we're not revealing. The reason perhaps we're not revealing to them is because we know there's work to be done. We have to perform this act of alchemy, putting things in the cauldron. It's not just any cauldron, it's a ceremonial vessel. And we put it all in the cauldron, and it's something we do maybe on our own, in our sort of private way, and we're quite gritty about it. Remember, astrologically, there's Mars trine Saturn. Mars trine Saturn is forcing us to, be in control. Everything, it happens according to our own rules. That's how it works, and we kind of do in the end this private act of alchemy, perhaps at the end of the weekend, or it just comes together over the weekend. And maybe that also links to the fact that Sun is cazimi conjunction to Mercury. It's all about chaos, and then suddenly things come together, and that may be the moment when the cauldron is in front of us, everything is in the right place, all the ingredients are there, everything is there, and then there is that sort of almost act of sort of magical alchemical event when everything comes together and we realize who we are and what we've got, and we perhaps feel that we've done it. And so in the end, it looks like being a very powerful weekend when we can really get a great sense of who we are and what we can do. And now I want to look at the trine between Mars and Saturn. So let's have a look at this trine. And so I do regard this as being the main aspect of the weekend. And so here is the aspect. This is the precise moment the aspect happens, London time. And so you can see this happens actually at 1:15 p.m. on Sunday, the 9th. And so this Mars trine Saturn, it's somewhat difficult and contrary, because we don't know whether do we focus on the trine or do we focus on the fact that there is we've got a situation where two malefics, Mars and Saturn, are forming a trine with one another. And from a symbolic point of view, you'd think that Mars trine Saturn is about hard work. I mean, that's what it is, isn't it? Mars is about energy, Saturn is about structure. It is about hard work. And so, if we have Mars Saturn in our charts, it can be about pushing ourselves, and it may be about what the weekend is about. This weekend, we really want to throw everything we've got into achieving something, and maybe that's what we should do with this trine between Mars and Saturn. And the moon joins in. You can see that the moon is starting to make a conjunction to Mars. The moon is making a trine to Saturn. So it is a weekend, where if we're able to work hard, and Mars is in Cancer, Saturn is in Pisces. These are not extroverted signs. These signs are quite passive. We shouldn't be expecting immediate sort of recognition with Mars trine Saturn. We have to do something because we know it's important. Praise doesn't matter, at least in the short term, and we just work away, and in the end, we get a result. I mean, that's certainly one way of looking at Mars trine Saturn. On the other hand, Mars trine Saturn are, Mars is the lesser malefic, Mars is the greater malefic, and it might represent something bad happening. And with a trine, something bad happening easily. And that means that it's just not a weekend for taking risks or for doing something dangerous, or for playing with guns, equipment, explosive devices, whatever it is. It will just blow up very easily. It won't take much for something to catch fire or to get an electric shock or whatever else might happen. Or if you're doing something dangerous, don't take risks with Mars trine Saturn. And so that's one aspect of this, and we just shouldn't forget. In the thumbnail I've got a skull. There is a connection between Mars Saturn and death. I think in most cases it won't be about death, but this particular Mars Saturn trine is tied up with Venus. You can see that Venus is, because the Mars Saturn midpoint is at 18 Taurus, and so Venus is semi-square the Mars Saturn midpoint, and Venus on the Mars Saturn midpoint, you could say, is a little bit grim. You could, if you want to be literal about it, you could say bad news about women. I mean, let me just tell you what the midpoint schools would say about it. If we take Alfred Vitter's Rules for Planetary Pictures, what does he say about Venus on the Mars Saturn midpoint? I haven't looked it up beforehand, so I'm not quite sure what he's going to. Mars Saturn Venus insensibility in. So Venus aspecting the Mars Saturn midpoint. Insensibility, ingratitude for kind action, actions of separation by female persons, death of female persons, also of mother, blood relatives, or close acquaintances. So what it would be saying is that Venus might be women in society, and death of women, women under pressure, women in an unfortunate position. So that could be one interpretation. Sort of a more recent interpretation, I think more recent, Reinhold Ebertin, in Combination of Stellar Influences, he looks at Venus on the Mars Saturn midpoint. He says sort of slightly differing. He focuses more on relationships, sober thinking, the visualization of stark reality, narrow-mindedness or selfishness in love, the stage of considering separation in love or in marriage. So his interpretation is perhaps more accessible, and Ebertin would say Venus aspecting a Mars Saturn midpoint would be about difficulties in relationships, or the reality starting to form, realizing that things aren't going to work. Venus likes to be sort of happy-go-lucky, the relationship planet, but then on the Mars Saturn midpoint, this is it. This is the reality. It's not getting any better. So that Venus will, I believe, color the Mars Saturn trine, and it could just be for some of us a realization about some of the people in our lives that maybe it's not going anywhere, or at least in the short term things are a little bit stuck. And the Mars Saturn trine, you will notice that this chart is set for London, and so London, Mars is in the first house, Saturn is on the midheaven, so that's not great. We know that nothing's great in Britain as far as I hear. I haven't been back to Britain. I haven't visited the UK for nearly 6 years, so I don't know what it's really like. But it's not exact, though. That Mars is slightly off the ascendant. So we might want to ask the question, is there a place where Saturn is exactly on the midheaven and Mars is exactly on the ascendant at the time of that trine? And we can use astrocartography to try to locate this place. I think this is it. So this is Europe. And this red line is all the places where Saturn is on the midheaven. And so you can see that it goes through Norway, goes through Trondheim, goes through Oslo, then goes down through Germany, close to Munich, Milan, and through. But here is the Mars line. And so what we're looking for is the crossover point. And so the crossover point is right in the middle of Germany. And it might therefore be the case that this Mars-Saturn trine is going to have a particular influence on Germany, because there is this place in central Germany where Saturn is on the midheaven, Mars is on the ascendant. And we know that Germany is under pressure. We've got elections coming up in, when is it, 23rd, so 27th, so in just over a fortnight, you've got federal elections in Germany. And in the run-up to this, we've got that Mars trine, we've got Mars trine Saturn. In fact, Mars and Saturn are slow moving. That Mars trine Saturn will still be in orb on February the 23rd when there are federal elections. And of course, there's this news about that support for the CDU is starting to decline a bit. I think they unsuccessfully tried to get some bill through to restrict immigration, and they got the support of the AfD, and there was a lot of controversy there. And Germany is not a country that is happy with itself, and a lot of countries are not happy with themselves. Britain is not happy with itself, France, Germany, but this aspect may particularly affect Germany. And if you're interested, here is the Mars-Saturn trine relocated for Berlin. And Mars is right on the ascendant, Saturn is right on the midheaven. So this Mars trine Saturn just may tell us something about the next few weeks in Germany and what is going on in Germany in the run-up to their elections. And so as far as other events are concerned, I just wanted to look at a few events that took place while Mars was trine Saturn. Now, clearly, one event in the near future, that will be taking place at the time of at the time of the Mars trine Saturn is the German federal elections. I've gone to February 23rd, 2025. I believe the polls open at 8 o'clock, and so there's our Mars Saturn trine, and it's interesting with the German federal elections, and that if we take 8 o'clock opening of the polls again, I might have got 8 o'clock wrong. I just Googled it. I think the ballots open at 8 o'clock. If I'm wrong, I'm sorry. But notice how the moon is exactly square the ascendant at the time of the federal elections, and the Mars, where's Mars gone? Mars and Saturn. There's Mars, there's Saturn. So that means that the Mars-Saturn midpoint, there's Mars at 20, there's Mars at 17, Saturn at 20. So the Mars-Saturn midpoint is around 18 Taurus. So that means that the moon is going to be sesquiquadrate the Mars-Saturn midpoint at a pole of the opening of poles, and the ascendant is going to be semi-square the Mars-Saturn midpoint. So there's a real Mars-Saturn feel actually on the time of the federal election. In fact, we can look at we can look at the dial just to show you what I mean. Where's it gone? If we look at the 90-degree dial, just so there's the German federal elections, and that's a 30-degree dial. Let's switch to a 90-degree dial, and so there's the ascendant and the moon. So if we put ascendant and the moon on the pointer, there you see there's the Mars-Saturn midpoint, and the ascendant and the moon are right on the Mars-Saturn midpoint at the time which polls open. So I'm not convinced. I don't think anyone is really convinced that these federal elections are necessarily going to solve anything. And looking at some past events, the fall of Saigon. This is when I think this is the time when the last American helicopter left the roof of the American embassy in Saigon in South Vietnam in 1975, and a bit of a problem time for the United States. And at that time, Mars was there was an exact Mars-Saturn trine when that helicopter left the roof of the embassy. And so, was that Mars-Saturn trine good for America? I don't think so. And look at where Saturn was. Saturn was at 1352 Cancer. So does that ring any bells? So the USA, if we look at the USA's chart, here's the USA's chart. The USA has its sun at 1319 Cancer. So Saturn was pretty close to the USA's sun at the time of the conjunction to the USA's sun, and of course Mars was trine the sun. So that Mars trine Saturn, certainly in the United States, was not a great event. I mean, of course, would be great if you were North Vietnamese, but not so great if the USA, if you're the USA. But so that might indicate that it's not always a positive event when you have Mars trine Saturn. And 60s icon Janis Joplin. Now she was a Capricorn, and she died of, I think, a heroin overdose on October the 4th, 1970. And I think she died I think the reason she died is because there was heroin going around, and maybe someone had been trying to please celebrities or whatever, but the heroin was stronger than usual. And so, of course, if the problem with heroin being illegal is that you don't know what you're buying. You don't know what the strength. You don't know the strength of the heroin you're buying, and that's one of the problems. And I think it was stronger than she was expecting, and she died of a heroin overdose. And Mars at the time was at 20 Virgo, and Saturn was at 21 Taurus. So Mars trine Saturn linked with the death of Janis Joplin. Now you could say, well, so what? I mean, people die all the time. Well, but on the other hand, Janis Joplin, in terms of the 60s, she was a major figure. I mean, she was very charismatic, and she sort of represented the 60s, and you could say one of the people who represented the 60s. So maybe it was kind of fitting. The 60s was, of course, over by then. It was 1970, but her dying on a Mars trine Saturn, it sort of makes a little bit of sense. I mean, you can read into it whatever you want. Now, should you get married when Mars is trine Saturn? Possibly not. I mean, would you? Well, you could say, well, Mars trine Saturn, that's creating stability. Does it? Well, Mars trine Saturn, the marriage of John F. Kennedy Jr., September 21st, 1996. I don't know what time they were born, so I don't know, but it looks, so this is just an Aries chart, so I don't know what time they were born. So the marriage happened, but clearly this marriage didn't last very long, because in 1999 John Kennedy Jr., I think, overestimated his flying skills and was taking his wife, Carolyn Bessette, and her sister on this trip and on his flight. I don't think he was qualified for night flying, and they had this accident and it went into the sea and they all died. And so this marriage had Mars not exactly trine Saturn, so it wasn't a particularly close trine between Mars and Saturn, but a rather difficult trine with Saturn in Aries, the sign of its fall. So, here is a celebrity, son of a U.S. president, getting married, and he gets married on a Mars trine Saturn. Did it work for him? It did not work for him. Within around 3 years later, there was a plane crash, and both him and his wife went and died. So maybe if you're getting married, you should avoid having Mars trine Saturn in the chart. Another marriage, which had Mars trine Saturn, in which both couples died, or got executed, was the marriage of Louis XVI. So Louis XVI of France, he got married on May the 16th, 1770. I think it got around 1 p.m. in Versailles. And Mars is at 2744 Pisces, Saturn at 2730 Cancer. So an exact Mars-Saturn trine. So you're getting a message. Don't get married when Mars is trine Saturn. Because it seems it doesn't just affect one partner, it affects both of them. We've got two marriages where both the husband and wife died violently with Mars trine Saturn. So I think that's pretty clear. And Mars trine Saturn can represent violent events. Going back to Germany, the destruction of the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. I think it seems to me pretty likely in 2022 that it was the United States that blew up the pipeline. I personally don't believe it was the Ukrainians that blew up the pipeline. But this pipeline, aside from being an environmental catastrophe, with all that gas being released, it was also helped destroy Germany's economy. And it was an act of terrorism, I think, perpetrated by one of Germany's allies. I think it was America that did it. Some people say it was Ukraine. Even if it was Ukraine, why does Germany? If it was Ukraine, why does Germany support the Ukrainian regime so much? A regime which has just wrecked the German economy. It seems crazy. But anyway, Mars trine Saturn can be connected with an act of violence and an act of terrorism, and you can see that Mars was fairly close to the trine of Saturn when it happened. And another act of state terrorism was the destruction of the Rainbow Warrior in 1985, when the Greenpeace ship was blown up in Auckland Harbour by the French. They didn't like the Rainbow Warrior messing around with their nuclear tests, so the French sent some agents and it blew up, and I think a photographer was killed. And again, at the time of the blowing up of a Rainbow Warrior, there was a Mars-Saturn trine. So it was easy. It sank very quickly, I think. The photographer was killed. Mars trine Saturn. And finally, the acquittal of O.J. Simpson. Now, if you were around at the time, this was a huge event. Absolutely massive event. Everyone was watching the O.J. Simpson verdict. Remember, O.J. Simpson had killed his wife, or at the time it was allegedly, but he killed his wife or his ex-wife, and he killed a man who was around at the time. So he killed two people, and there was some questions about evidence and a suggestion of racism and so forth, and he got acquitted. And this acquittal happened with Mars at 17 Scorpio and Saturn at 19 Pisces. Does this indicate there's something slightly perverse about Mars trine Saturn? Mars is rising. Somehow he does something bad, and yet the evildoer is released. That might be how Mars trine Saturn works. And that's it. That's all I want to say about Mars Saturn. I was going to look at some people with Mars trine Saturn, but I thought it's probably more useful just to focus on the events, because I suppose one might be thinking, what is it going to mean with Mars trine Saturn? But looking at the events, I think there is evidence here that Mars trine Saturn is not necessarily a fortunate influence. Of course, there is a selection bias. Of course, I've chosen unfortunate events, but I think we can get an idea about how Mars trine Saturn might be working. Anyway, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this video, I'd be very grateful if you were to like it. If you're not subscribed, I'd be super grateful if you were to subscribe. If you want to buy me a coffee, there is a link in the description, and I will talk to you again very soon.